Well, good evening. My name is Russ Matthews from City Bible Forum. I want to take a moment to welcome you to The Edge. If it's your first time coming to The Edge, we want to welcome you. For those of you who've been to the Edge event in the past, welcome back. For all of those overseas guests, thank you for coming along tonight or today, depending on where you are watching this event in the world. This year is a bit different. We will be doing these events live and also online in different cities throughout Australia. It's the same event you've come to know over the years, but with more of a local feel. Regardless of where the event is held, we hope you are able to engage with and enjoy tonight's discussion. Tonight, and every night at The Edge, whether it is live or online, it is short, sharp, and smart. Two speakers each have 15 minutes to share their wisdom and experience on a specific topic. Then you get to pose your questions to the panel. Short and sharp talks from two expert speakers on tonight's subject. We're going to be taking this topic to the edge. During the conversation, we may consider the bigger questions of life based on the subject spoken of by our speakers. Then by engaging with the speakers on the panel, we can consider the answers provided about this important subject. But really, the panel is your time to shine. Send in your questions throughout the talks at The Edge. These details should have been sent to you prior to the event. We do have a question master here to be able to go through and take in your questions and send them to the panel through our moderator. Now, just a small reminder, could you make sure you put down where you're sending it from so that we're able to know who we're speaking to and what part of the earth we're actually sharing this event tonight. When we get to the panel discussion, our moderator will pose these questions to our speakers. Can I ask something of you, though? If you want your question to be considered, in the spirit of this event, could you make sure to keep these questions short, sharp, and respectful? Thank you for asking your questions at The Edge. Tonight is short, sharp, and smart. The time is going to go by fast, and you will wish we had longer, I promise. I will come back after the panel discussion to share with you the next steps after tonight's discussion. But now, let's get to the event. Again, my name is Russ Matthews, and I'm going to hand this over to our moderator. Enjoy your time at The Edge.
Thanks, Russ, and welcome to The Edge. We are coming in live from Perth. I'm Daniel Principe, your host for this evening. Tonight and every night at The Edge is short, sharp, and smart. Two speakers will each have 15 minutes to share their wisdom and experience on a topic. Then you get to pose your questions to the panel. We're excited to know there are people registered from all over the country and the world. To kick things off and to test the question function, could those of you viewing from home please send us a message from wherever you're watching? Send an SMS with the number provided on our webpage or in your booklet and submit your questions throughout the night. This is your way of engaging with our speakers tonight and your way of being part of The Edge. Tonight our topic is Rethinking Workplace Relations. In addition to equal opportunity laws, there are a growing number of initiatives in the modern workplace to improve culture and outcomes, and yet we still see issues with racism, sexism, and bullying. How does this still happen? Surely there must be a better way to engage at work. What if you could come to work and feel connected and inspired, supported and valued, instead of stressed or anxious or isolated? Tonight, through two short and sharp talks, plus a panel discussion, The Edge speakers will share key insights on some of the current relational challenges faced in the workplace. They will help us consider how we can all contribute in simple ways to transform our work relationships. Tonight's Edge speakers are here to inform us and help us consider the hope that can be found in this subject. You can find all of these details in the event booklet that was emailed to you prior to the event. Let me introduce our two speakers. After the introductions, they will come up and give their talks. To mix things up, I'll be introducing our second speaker first. Our second speaker is Jill McAlpine. Jill is a clinical psychologist with over 25 years' experience catering to mental health aspects in schools, prisons, and clinical settings across not-for-profit, government, and private sectors. She currently conducts a private psychology practice in Perth. Our first speaker for tonight will be Simon Bibby. Simon is currently Principal Practice Lead of Employee Relations at Uniting WA. He has worked in the field of industrial relations and human resources for 35 years. He has worked on both sides of the industrial relations fence, working for both employers and unions. I know, having read these bios, I'm very much looking forward to tonight's discussion and the questions that follow. If you haven't already, please click on the Join In button on your screen and send in your questions. My name is Daniel Principe, and I'll be back after the talks to facilitate the questions. So in the tradition of The Edge, of keeping things short, sharp, and smart, let's welcome our first speaker, Simon Bibby.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm going to start with a story. It's a story of a woman who started a new role in a company. She had worked in this company before. She was aware roughly of the duties she needed to perform. And in this new role, there were some changes. When she looked at the job description, she went to her supervisor and said, "I think this is impossible. I won't be able to do it." The supervisor said, "Well, why don't you have a try? If you've got any problems, come and talk to me." So she decided to do the job. She took it up and she attempted to do it, but soon ran into difficulties. The problem she faced was she was a sales rep. She had to deliver cartons to certain stores, but she found the cartons were far too heavy for her to lift off the back of the truck. And the other problem was the territory she had to cover was far too wide. So she went back to her boss and said, "It's not working." She actually went back on numerous occasions and even put it in writing. At no stage did she say she was suffering mentally or physically in this job. After a while, she started to struggle. There was a slow decline in her health and her mental well-being. She started sleeping badly. She became anxious. She had trouble remembering things and soon lost all motivation to work. She went to her doctor, who referred her to a psychiatrist, and he diagnosed that she was severely depressed as a direct result of the work that she was doing. This is a story that's actually from a famous case that went all the way to the High Court, and she sued the company for negligence and she failed. It's a tragic story, and you always have to think in terms of the people involved in this, because not only would it be her who suffered, it would be her spouse, her children, and her friends who would see a slow decline over time in that person, in a good friend of theirs. I have to say too, I've had experience in one particular place where there was a group of workers where, so tragically, one particular employee decided to take his life. But he didn't really mention much to his colleagues, and suddenly they were left with deep grief for the fact that he had taken his life in the way that he did. In a study released by the Australian Institute this month, it estimates the cost of mental health issues in workplaces between $15.8 and $17.4 billion a year. What they identified is some of the factors that contribute to these problems, mental health in the workplace, are things like workloads being given to employees who can't complete them in the time assigned, long and unpredictable hours, tasks with heavy demands on the employee, but ones which they had limited control over. And sadly, the report also notes that many of these employees were bullied and harassed by management. Now, the significance of the study is much of it considers a time before the pandemic. Now we find ourselves in a completely different context. And for the first time in our lives, we are now facing circumstances which are life-threatening, and that on a global scale. The effect on our collective mental well-being can't be underestimated. And as we move into a very uncertain future, the onset of vaccinations, etc., isn't necessarily going to solve the problem for us. Now, I think at a very deep level, something has changed for us. This man, Charles Taylor, is a famous philosopher, and he wrote a book called The Secular Age. In this, he noted that one of the features of living in the modern world is that we have a buffered self. And what he means by that is that as we live in cities and so on, we are buffered from a lot of the harsh effects of the natural world. This leads to a mindset when we tend to think that we can control everything with our science and technology. But a pandemic has shattered that. Life is not so buffered anymore. We're now faced with shocking pictures of places like New York City, of all places, digging mass graves. And there also reports of daily death tolls in the thousands across America. And whilst it's been well managed in Australia, and particularly in WA, it's still deeply unsettling to us because we all know it only takes one report of an infection and then we're waiting for the next story, which is that they may have been visiting someone or went to a party with 30 other people. And we're always thinking, is this going to mean an outbreak? Now, this has also had dramatic impacts on our workplaces. If you were fortunate enough to keep your job last year, you then had to face the situation of literally uprooting from working in an office and then working from home. For some, that was terrific. I really enjoyed it. I didn't have all of the normal interruptions of my day, but I soon found out from my colleagues, particularly young mothers, it was a nightmare. We also started to realise we lost something. There was something about working in proximity with other people that was making the job enjoyable, and that now had to be set aside, at least for a time being. What we need to do now, though, is take seriously we're living in very difficult and uncertain times, and we need to find ways and means of supporting each other, particularly in our workplaces. I want to just, in the brief time that I have left, I want to talk about to those groups who have to manage these employees, those employees who may well be struggling with mental health issues, and then lastly, for those of us who aren't struggling with mental health issues but want to know what they can do in the circumstances. From my own personal experience, this is a very difficult thing to manage, particularly when you're dealing with an employee who has maybe left the workplace, notified that they are on stress leave. The time alone in dealing with that matter is huge. I clocked quite recently that in 1 week alone, when I was dealing with one of these matters, it took me 23 hours in terms of all of the issues that I had to deal with. Now, more than ever, we have to find ways and means when we are at work of connecting well with each other. And I'm finding little things can make a big difference. Celebrating birthdays, when you're at the office, going out to lunch together, having coffee, but also for managers just to keep an eye on people and see how they're travelling. If you're working remotely, it becomes even harder, but it's still something that you have to deal with. I have to confess that I was very sceptical about Zoom and what it could do in terms of keeping a team together, but actually our team found a way of doing it, and we produced video diaries of what we did at home, and we got an insight into people which we never had before, so that was quite interesting. But it helped keep us together and helped us checking in on each other and making sure we were okay. Where you start to see an employee struggling, it's really important you get alongside them. Keep in mind the story I opened with. The employee never made it clear that they were struggling mentally. So it may be the case that the employee is just simply not thinking clearly at this point. There might be an awful lot going on for them. So you need to check in with them sensitively and ask them how they're going. If they suddenly absent themselves from the workplace, then you really need to work at how you will build a relationship with them and how you will keep a conversation going, because you need to manage a number of things, and not the least of which is you've got another team of employees around you who are probably taking more work as a result of the absence. Sadly, it may be the case that after some time, you find out how long they're going to be off, and this can't go on forever, and you need to understand roughly how long they're going to be away from work, and it is the case, it may become unsustainable, and you will need then to get legal advice as to what you can do from there. What happens if you're an employee struggling in this situation where you have a mental health issue? You need to do everything to assist your employer to understand the issues you're facing. You don't have to divulge sensitive information, but you do need to think carefully about their needs, the needs of your boss and the needs of your employees. And critically, you need to keep telling them how long you're going to be off and giving them a rough estimate of when you will come back to work. And you may need a medical professional to help you with that, because it's critical you don't get back to work too early, because you may not be well enough to get back to work, and it could only prolong the problem. And lastly, what about those people who are working in a team alongside of people? All I'm saying to you is you need to be aware of each other and work out ways and means in which you can watch out for people who may well be struggling, and to engage in a conversation with them to see if there's anything you can do to help them. There are many resources available to you to help you with this. One thing that we do in our workplace is we put on the Are You OK Day in September. And during that time, what we do, it goes for a month, and we raise the awareness for people in the workplace of both the issue of mental health, but also some very careful strategies of what people can do to invite and open up conversations. So, I'll conclude by saying this. We're living in very difficult times, and it is the place where for many of us we spend most of our time, and we need to find ways of supporting each other. We need to discover the practices that we need to put in place to be good communities. Managers have to care for staff as best they're able. Employees need to realise ways of getting alongside of people who may be struggling. And an employee who is in that situation needs to find ways and means of communicating with their employer how long they're going to be off work. But in all these things, what I'm saying is working hard at it is really important at this time, in this strange times that we live in. I'm going to hand over to Jill now, and she will give another perspective on how to deal with this.
Who are you? I really want to know. Tell me, who are you? These iconic words by Pete Townsend of The Who resonate every day in my work as a clinical psychologist. Tell me your story. Help me understand. Help me to really know, so I know how I can help you. And so begins the outpouring of innermost thoughts, desires, emotions, anguish, hurt. It's easy to take all those and wrap it up neatly in a diagnosis or two, a psychiatric label that defines a person. But I want to know more of you, not just how you are within your skin. Who are you to others? And how do you sit in your relationships in all the different contexts of life? In addressing the topic, Rethinking Work Relations, I want to challenge us to rethink not just how we can work alongside each other better, but how we can think better about those we work alongside for emotionally safe and healthy work environments. So who do we say we are? Ubuntu is a Xhosa Zulu term meaning common humanity, or literally a person is a person through other people, a person in community. Systems theory helps us to make sense of our relationships with others. From inside out, we are embedded in a ripple wave of systems flowing out from us and flowing in towards us. Our intimate relationship, our home environment, our family system, our workplace, our sporting group or church community, our political influences, our societal impacts, our cultural flavour and our beliefs. These systems inform who we are. They may serve to either liberate us or to restrict us. As we start to unpack how we sit in life, we can see that we are not just individuals with an internal system of mind, body, soul, but that we are influenced and shaped inextricably by others. Everything I do has an effect on you and your well-being, and everything you do has an effect on me. We're all different. We all have a story, and our stories are entwined. So who are you? What is your story? Are you paralyzed with anxiety or battling depression and sinking fast? Are you struggling through another pregnancy loss or loss of a pregnancy dream? Are you addicted to online gaming, to porn? Do you go home to a newborn baby at the end of your long day? Is your child struggling at school? Are you pining for someone dear to you? Is work crushing you? Do you question if God even exists? We talk a lot about work-life balance, but let's be considered about what's being weighed up and what's sitting heavy on our scales. What of our life are we carrying into work? And what from our workplace do we take home with us? As we think about work relations, it's important to consider each other not just as a job description in business attire, but as a person who may be sitting uncomfortably or even painfully in life, and in life at work. We have different pressures pushing on us at different breaking points. Some of us have a greater resilience and thrive on pressure, while others are more fragile, with cracks starting to show. When it's all too much, and we lose our capacity to withstand the pressures of work, we crash and we burn. And quite often, our work relationships get toasted in the mix. Since the World Health Organization formally acknowledged burnout in 2019 as a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed, burnout has been given a lot of oxygen. Burnout is contextualized in the system of the workplace, and it's conceptualized as a work-related problem. Not just as a personal problem, not just as an individual worker problem. You know you're in burnout mode when you're sitting in the middle of three things: exhaustion, cynicism, and fatigue. And so we see our performance plummeting and absolutely declining. So reduced efficiency. I like to call it the 3 Ps. So pooped, peeved, and plummeting. This year, Harvard Business Review has been spruiking about this phenomenon, tapping into the leading research on the topic. Other than an unsustainable workload among the several causes of burnout, a significant predeterminant is a lack of supportive community. Indeed, this perception by workers resonates quite strongly in clients I see through the workers' compensation process. It is common to hear ruminations of, I've been off work for 4 weeks now and I've not heard from anyone in the office. Nobody's talked to me about what happened to me. No one's asked me how I'm doing. I feel invisible at work. I've been so loyal to the company for years, but now I realise it's a one-way street. It seems that perceived lack of awareness in others, or little endeavour by others to understand a struggling worker's plight, may serve to heighten their distress. I want to challenge our thinking as workers and managers to consider a relational approach in our endeavour to work better alongside each other and stay robust in our workplace. A Mile in My Shoes is a series of temporary art installations around the world created by the Empathy Museum, based in London. Visitors are invited to select a pair of shoes from the museum's collection, and while walking, they listen to a story about the shoe owner's life through headphones. The shoes in the museum belong to everyday people: palliative care nurses, drug addicts, people with physical challenges, people of different ethnic backgrounds and faith. Its aim is to help people approach global issues such as prejudice, conflict, and inequality through empathy to change their relationships. But empathy is a construct used in therapy, you might think. What place does it have in business? You know the saying, when we have to make hard people decisions, like laying off people with job redundancies. It's just business. Well, according to Helen Rees, a leading proponent of empathy from Harvard Medical School, expressing empathy in the workplace increases job satisfaction. It reduces burnout, is highly correlated with positive staff relations, and she reiterates it's perhaps the most critical skill in a crisis. Imagine if your next team building day at work involved swapping each other's shoes for the day. Bring rearranged socks, by the way, of course. Wouldn't that be enlightening? TV audiences thrive on this, with shows like Undercover Boss, Boss for a Day, eliciting in people, bosses and workers alike, the three hallmarks of empathy: acknowledgement, understanding, and responding. So let me tell you a story about Barnett Greenman. Barney, as he was affectionately called, was the only son born to Jewish parents. They were removed from their home in Rotterdam in 1942 and taken to Auschwitz, where they were separated. Barney and his mother, Elsa, did not survive what happened to them. Barney was 2. Barney's father, Leon Greenman, survived and devoted the rest of his life to campaigning against intolerance and injustice. Aspects of his young family's life are documented and displayed at the Jewish Museum in London. These little brown shoes on the screen, these shoes are Barney's shoes. So empathy is seeing life through another's eyes. It's understanding their experience and its effect on them. And then it's about responding genuinely with compassion and with kindness. Empathy. Walk a mile in my shoes. At its core, empathy facilitates connection. If we feel acknowledged, listened to, and understood, we feel connected. Connection makes for meaningful relationships in our marriage, our family, on the sports field, in our church, and in our workplace. As with empathy, a strong sense of connection is identified in the research as mitigating workplace burnout. Connection is not an individual pursuit. One Lego block needs another to connect. Connection is relational and ties us together. It breeds a sense of belonging, being in the context of others, being part of a community. Here in Australia, loneliness is an epidemic that for many has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's no wonder that social prescribing has become a buzz strategy in medical and psychological practices, acknowledging social connection as beneficial for emotional and for physical health. Even in the animal world, we see primates engage in the practice of allo-grooming, where gorillas, they gather together in groups to preen each other. Their primary purpose is not personal hygiene, actually, but to form and strengthen social bonds between each other. Now, I'm not suggesting you go and purchase deodorant body spray for your team member with whom you share a really tiny office with no ventilation in order to get along and work well together, or maybe I am. But fostering a healthy sense of community in the workplace is also not just about high ratios of indoor plants to staff, free lunchtime massages, work-funded gym memberships. While these are great things and to be encouraged, I want to challenge our thinking and practices in making a gear shift from purely focusing on self-care towards a focus on other care, caring for others at work, but even better, caring communally for others at work. Stephen Riker, social psychologist and leading thinker on group processes and social identity, he suggests that collective care in the context of shared experiences breeds collective resilience in the face of difficult situations. This is evident when we consider significant disasters in modern history. Footage from the attack on the World Trade Center on September 11 shows people self-organising and helping each other down the stairwells, sheltering and ushering each other into nearby shops. People were sacrificing their own lives for complete strangers. There are more stories pouring out from the COVID-19 pandemic of mutual aid groups having developed and community action networks formed all around the world. Not to mention our own Australian experience of communal support through our bushfires and our floods. So, what's the gear shift then in our thinking about workplace relationships? I want to tell you a little story. It's a big story. A story about empathy, connection, and collective care. This is my own story. It's a marathon story. It's a half marathon story, actually, to be precise. So let me take you to the 2014 Gold Coast Marathon in Queensland. So 12 or so runners from a run club in Perth made the plane trip interstate for the event. Jackie, my running buddy, who's a much stronger runner than I am, there was no comparison. Her plan was that she would come with me, be my pacer, carrying my water, my sports gels, tech, all strapped to her waist belt. And so the day arrived. It was still dark when the starter gun fired. We were full of excitement and expectation. It was so hard to slow down with all the fanfare and exhilaration. The crowds were clapping. It felt great, Jackie alongside me. We reached the 5K mark, my fastest ever. 10K mark, another personal best. We were on track. By the 15th kilometre, the adrenaline started to wear off. Jackie, checking her timer, knew I was flagging. She amped up her focus on other stuff. Look at the beach, isn't it amazing, Jill? At the 18th kilometre mark, I hit a wall. I couldn't do it anymore. My core started to give. I started to slump. Everything inside me was yelling, stop. I can't do this, it's too much. I was pooped. I was peeved. Jackie sensed I was slipping away. Come on, Jill, keep going. Come on. You go on without me, Jackie. Just keep going. Keep going. I couldn't keep up. Jackie sped up and ran ahead of me. And then she positioned herself right in front of me and she slowed herself back down to my pace. Just right in my steps. Just, Jill, be my shadow. Put your feet in my steps. We can do this. In that moment, all my distress and pain, I had so much hope. I felt so connected by an imaginary tow line as Jackie led me through. And so we continued for 3 more kilometres, Jackie leading me all the way into the finishing chute. She positioned herself alongside me again. The crowds thickened on either side. They must have heard my body groaning in agony. But you know, they always say the hardest part of any endeavour is the bit just before the end. Yes. 30 metres before the finish line, I crashed and I burned. Sweet relief of the ground beneath my body. I was done. I plummeted. And then I felt my body rising up like a phoenix out of the ashes. The rest was a blur. Other than my finishing photo, reflecting 2 wings on either side of me, Jackie on one side and a complete stranger, a lady named Casey, we found out later, on the other side, holding on to me. They picked me up when I fell. They carried me and they ran me across the finish line, straight into the care of the 2 paramedics waiting in anticipation on the other side, all gloved up. So who is Jackie in your workplace? Who helps you stay focused? Who comes alongside you, dropping to your pace? Who leads you? Who sustains you with the right fuel? Who directs you to beneficial resources? Who rallies around you and rallies other supports around you, working together for your good? Who picks you up? Who carries you? Who lifts your spirit? Who cheers you on to get the job done? Let's not lose sight of the person. Let's bring people back into the workplace in the mix of deadlines, meetings, outcomes, KPIs. We all have a life story. We all cope with life in different ways. We all have different needs. I encourage you to look at your colleagues through a different lens. Let's rethink how we can better work alongside each other in our workplace, in connected community, with genuine empathy and with considered collective care.
Thank you. Thank you so much to both of our speakers. They were absolutely compelling conversations they've started tonight. Thank you for the storytelling. Thank you for your own personal experience. I'd love to invite both of you up now to join us. And this is obviously for everyone at home, your opportunity to continue sending through questions that we're going to get to just now. So now we welcome you both back. Thank you so much. There are quite a few questions coming through. I'm just going to kick us off with hopefully a more simple one. For Jill. So there's first question. Is there a sense in which things like "Are you okay" days are a bit token and don't really engage the root causes of mental health issues?
I think Are You OK Day is a good initiative because what it does is it's sticky. It kind of keeps in the mindset that we need to be observing, watching our colleagues, and particularly I think it's more about listening. And so if it's going to encourage us to position ourselves again into someone else's space and bubble, I think it's really helpful. It's how you use the strategy.
Yeah, fantastic.
It can be, but it also can be, if you think it through carefully, I think you can start in September and you need to aim at how you will roll it out over the whole year.
Fantastic. On top of that, I think this question follows quite nicely, which looks at, we've had a conversation about the relational approach. Is there a way that also could wear someone out? That could lead to their own burnout by trying to be so considerate about what's happening, especially, in this global climate that we're in, where we recognize that all of us are under extra stress. So is there a way to do that? And potentially, how do you keep yourself well in that?
I think this is also about professional boundaries.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that our workplaces are not therapeutic consulting rooms. So we have to remember our context when we're at work, we're working, focusing on core business. It's about how we get to that end. I think when we talk to someone about their issues, if they're struggling with mental health issues, the important thing is to know when it is that we need to then seek help outside of ourselves. Collective care certainly taps into that.
Yeah, I thought that Jill's talk touched on a really important point about how we need to work together on these sorts of issues. But it is the case. It is a very tough gig for managers in this situation, and they need to find ways and means of being supported through it. And hence, they need to have understand their limitations. In terms of what they need to be doing and what they can't do, but also the thing that I did forget to mention in my talk is they should try and connect their employee with an employee assistance program or a professional so that they can do a lot of the heavy lifting through the process.
Yeah, great. In terms of for people leaders, are there things or are there programs to foster a culture of empathy? Like, are there specific tips?
I think it is the case that the values of an organisation will be pretty critical and have to be driven from the top down. There is the balancing of various needs, and I don't think there's any silver bullet in this, but I think what we've touched on is for the executive to be right behind sort of initiatives where people are supported, people are given consideration to some of the issues that they're facing and to address workload issues. So in the story that I told at the beginning, you can see that management just simply didn't respond to the issues. really management today need to be very responsive and sensitive to the needs of employees. So I guess, once again, what Jill was talking about is being empathetic, learning to listen carefully and work through those sorts of skills that you have to engender that sense of care in a workplace. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, from your perspective, does that need to be structured in terms of with line managers or with HR departments, that there's opportunities to really check in, especially now, you know, that there are so many pressures going on just globally, maybe with childcare, with, you know, people working from home. Do we need to factor that in and actually put that into, you know, the structures of an organisation?
Yes, I think that's really important. Probably the driving issue there is that today, in order to be an employer of choice, you're going to have to address those sorts of issues so people have a very positive experience at work. So yes, you do, and certainly we have strategies in place to think those things through. So quite well developed change management programs to think about how we get people lower down in the organisation, ensuring that they're caring for employees and so on.
Fantastic. Anything else,
I
Jill?
think I'm aware of Safe Work Australia and the Human Rights Commission. They do set out some guidelines for employers and businesses as to the requirements for considering professional care of their workers. So as much as they're mandated to care for them physically, occupational health and safety, risk-wise, psychological safety is absolutely essential.
With that, so obviously we want to put structures in place where employers and organisations are hearing what's going on for their employees. What about the challenges? And we've just had a fantastic question come through saying, you know, telling my boss or colleagues that I might be struggling mentally or have challenges at home, that could jeopardise my career, that could jeopardise my promotion. How do we balance those two where there may be implied reasons why you wouldn't actually speak up and get support or let people know that you may need, you know, a mental health day or a mental health week?
Very tough question, and I anticipated this was going to be asked.
Thank you to whoever that was.
I don't really have an answer for it because, once again, in the study that I cited from the Australia Institute, what they pointed out was the return on investment to being a compassionate employer is huge. So if you have an employer that is unsympathetic, or alternatively you have very hard deadlines, somehow you have to manage that. It is the case that you have some protection at law, but if you're getting medical advice and they're clearly saying that you need time off, your employer has to listen to that, and they run a big risk if they don't. I know that probably is going to be a bit inadequate for the person who's struggling in that situation, but you really have to care for yourself so that you don't burn out in the process, because you could be in a much worse place if you don't speak up and do something about it. Jill, would you? Any ideas?
Not particularly answering the question, but I think it highlights the issue that if an employee is struggling and they don't feel comfortable or don't feel safe emotionally to have a conversation about their mental health with their employer, it says something about the culture of the place. So we tend to put it on the employee's shoulders, to brace yourself and tell your boss how you're going. But really the issue lies in the system. So it's something to consider.
Fantastic. Jill, there's a specific question here for you that says, Jill, I have a colleague who is suffering from burnout. How can I help them?
I think if we come back to empathy again, it's really trying not to fix them. It's just to listen, to be supportive of them, and to try to understand. When we think about those, the Russian stacking doll, we want to understand what is actually impacting on them. I think listening helps us to come to some awareness, and so just our presence, being there, trying to understand is enough, and then of course encouraging people to seek supports. Again, we have to remember, colleagues are colleagues, a psychologist and a client, they have a different relationship, and so it's about acknowledging, okay, who are the people that we can bring into the mix to support them.
Fantastic. Does that change at all if it's perhaps their direct line manager? Do you think there are different strategies?
I think at every level there are different strategies. As Simon mentioned, many workplaces have employee assistance programs. So if we can take someone's hand and head them into the appropriate resources, it could be encouraging them to see their GP, to also ask the GP to help them access psychological therapy, and that's through a mental health care plan. But again, many organisations provide a free counselling service to all of their staff.
Fantastic. Have a very relevant question. It says, question for Simon. I'm watching from Melbourne. We're about to jump into another lockdown. Any advice for the next week?
Well,
Move to Perth.
Yeah, that's great. Jill, move to Perth.
Well, I, as I said in my talk, I think I've discovered that Zoom actually can connect you in ways that I never imagined that it could. So if you're working in a team, to actually talk about how you're going to communicate during the lockdown, however long that goes for. I have no advice for if that questioner has little kids at home and has to survive a week or however long it's going to be. There are no answers to that one, unfortunately. But if you don't have kids and you enjoy working from home, then probably work out how you can work Zoom or whatever your platform is to connect in some way.
What do you think about that? For me personally, we've gone to fully remote working, lots of Zoom calls. I was skeptical at first.
Yep.
I've been pleasantly surprised that in some ways, albeit with the technology, it's been a humanising experience because we've seen each other in each other's homes, in their spaces.
Yeah.
So we've seen their dogs, we've seen their animals, sometimes their children, sometimes their partners popping in their heads as well. And so strikingly, even though I'm not in favour of it, I've actually found it to be a humanising experience for those elements.
Yeah, it has its place. I think what we've also discovered is we need to be together. And there's all sorts of issues that we've started to realise about. Informal interaction is the way particularly younger employees learn, and you won't get that opportunity on Zoom. And also just the day-to-day interaction of learning about other people. Somehow, you do need to be together, but we've now learnt we can use Zoom too. We can do other ways of connecting. So it's been it's an interesting experience. There's been pluses and minuses, but I can remember before the pandemic, everybody was sort of concerned about people working from home and had thousands of objections to it, but we had to do it overnight, and we actually can do it. So, yeah, and we'll probably have to keep on doing it in the future.
Do you think there's strategies to help people manage their mental health if perhaps they are on screens a lot more?
Yes, absolutely. Everyone's different. So I think the strategy is not going to be a blanket approach strategy, but it has to be nuanced. My experience has been that as an essential worker, I've kept going throughout. And so for a lot of people, they find that they're having to do things via online platforms. For some, that can be quite distressing because the actual stress of hearing voices in your head, so through your ears, through the screen, it's really hard to gauge people's emotions, their tone, particularly when things glitch. So the stress on people in this, working from home is quite huge. Again, being in a split focus, being after the kids, making dinner here, trying to get that deadline out, before 5 o'clock. So there's lots and lots of pressures that I think, again, is about, as an employer, finding out what the different life contexts are of your staff and seeing if you're able to nuance it that way. Some people have become more productive, others less so. It's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
For you personally, Jill, as a psychologist, how does your faith shape, obviously, what you've encouraged us all to do tonight with regards to empathy and community and the focus on the other? How does that influence that, or does that align with your instruction to us all this evening?
So I think naturally my job is all about empathy and trying to understand, and again, trying to respond as best as I can. I think as a business owner and as staff, and then also with people coming into the practice as clients, how we operate, or how we try to operate, is with a lot of grace, a lot of care. And so we invite everyone in, and we endeavour to show grace. And particularly if there are people who are quite challenging, the mindset is, well, we're going to endeavour to professionally care for them the best that we can. It's not so much in what we do, but it's in how we do it. So we just acknowledge everyone with integrity. Everyone is a person with a story, and we want to help them along.
Fantastic. Simon, for yourself, with regards to HR departments, we've just had a bit of an interesting question where they've said they're meant to be there to look after employees. Sometimes people feel that they're there to protect the employers or the organisation. Are there ways that we can graciously approach that dynamic?
Yeah, I think we can. It's a complex role at one level, but there are issues where, say, for example, the justice issue that plays out in a workplace it's where you have to stand alongside of an employee, and I'm more than happy to do that. Partly as a Christian, because I see I have a calling in that space to be accountable before God on those issues. But it also makes, if you want to know how it works out, because I've had a lot of experience in the Industrial Commission, it is the case you have to do the right thing by the employee, otherwise you will face problems downstream with the law. So yes, it's true that there are times when HR departments need to take the interests of the organisation at heart, and that may seem that they go against the employees. That doesn't happen that often, but equally I would say that the prime focus is we want to make it a place where people want to come and work and find ways and means of putting in place practices and so on that will help that happen. I think we've got a fantastic HR department, but I do say that they need to have some sense of impartiality from time to time. But generally, it's finding ways and means of putting in place practices that will help grow the business and keep it going and attract employees, keeping them there.
Fantastic. If someone is a person of faith and they find themselves in a leadership role, what should they embody, both to fulfil their role well, to look after their employees, but also to fulfil on, the organisational objectives? What should they draw upon to do that effectively?
Well, at its heart, I would say every Christian is demonstrating what it means to be truly human in whatever context they find themselves. So I think people in leadership need to be obviously very knowledgeable about their job, but obviously too they need to be people who are personable, who can be approachable, etc., and have the wisdom to know how to deal with situations. But I would expect people in that context to have maybe a different perspective and see people as very valuable in and of themselves, and that would make a difference. Jill, anything that you'd want to add to that?
I think, having staff and being Christian, I always try to position myself in their life. So, for example, if they are in a life stage where they have a growing family or grandchildren, I'm going to try my best to help them see that they're not just here for me, but we're there for each other. So things like, for example, extra time off, or just knocking off earlier, coming in later, there's been a late night, feeding the baby, just being mindful. So really showing grace, making allowances. I always say, perfection doesn't live here, in my practice, and everything that can go wrong, we can endeavour to correct it or fix it somewhere along the line. It doesn't matter. So I think it's really that grace aspect coming into
think that's
That's fantastic. And given where we find ourselves just as a society and globally right now, do you have cause for hope for how we could improve workplace relations? It's the final question for you both.
I'm hoping Jill will go first while I collect my thoughts. I think, how do you answer that question in terms of, I can speak from my own perspective, and I do think what I have learned in my career is it is really important that you address a culture of an organisation. And so I would say there's a growing awareness of the need for people or for leaders to establish healthy cultures in organisations. And to that extent, I think there is much hope. Interestingly, I think it is the case that people are now realising that has a return on investment. So we may be able to marry the issues of late market capitalism with being human. We might be able to do that, but certainly where I work, I have a wonderful experience of working with a lady who is very gifted in terms of culture change, and I'm enjoying to see the fruit of that. So personally, I have hope, and I'm hoping that can be transferred to other places as well. Jill.
Globally, absolutely. It might not be something right now, but for future, and particularly as a Christian, there are eternal aspects there. Again, in my role, if I don't represent hope to people, then what am I there for? I think we sometimes want to go too big in our thinking, but the little things can become big things. So if each of us can be those little beacons of hope in people's lives, that's how I would be approaching it. That's where I sit.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. Thank you, Simon and Jill. Tonight's been an outstanding conversation. We're actually coming to the end of this evening's Formal Affairs. There's obviously so much more that we could continue to unpack. As we do approach our final minutes together, I just want to put out there, you might be watching along at home and asking, what is next? And in a moment, we'll hear from Russ Matthews, who welcomed us this evening. But before we leave, I'd like to draw you all to a few things. So you may see this at the event page or inside of your event booklet. So firstly, feedback. Your feedback is exceptionally valuable to us to make these events better in the future. In the back of the booklet, you will find the QR code for the feedback for the Edge. Can you take a moment now to find the page and fill in the form? This should only take a couple of minutes. Our goal is to keep the conversation going. We want to hear from you and encourage more discussions on many of the topics brought up tonight. If you enjoyed this topic and would like to find out more, there are resources. We'd encourage you to go back to the bottom of the booklet, at the bottom of the event page, and to click the link for the podcasts, The Bigger Questions with Rob Martin. You can choose intimacy, going beyond shallow relationships. The Edge is also causing a bit of discord. We'll be continuing the discussion on Discord on Wednesday, the 2nd, and Thursday, the 3rd of June, 8 p.m. Eastern, and Perth for those here at 6 p.m. Details are in your booklet. The board is already ready for you to start the conversation. And finally, the next Edge topic will be on mental health, and that will be on the 28th of October, coming in live from Brisbane. Thank you for being here tonight at the first Edge event of 2021. Also, thank you to TLS Productions, the City Bible Forum, team here in Perth, and of course our speakers Simon Bibby and Jill McAlpine. I'm Daniel Principe from The Edge. We hope you enjoyed the night, and now I'll hand back over to Russ Matthews.
Well, thank you for being a part of The Edge tonight. We want to thank our speakers, the moderator, City Bible Forum, team members, and the crew behind the scenes. Thank you for being a part of this evening. We want to thank you for making this whole event possible. We hope you enjoyed the night. We will be sending you an email to ask you for your feedback for tonight's event. Your feedback is exceptionally valuable to us, and it helps to make these events even better in the future. Along with the feedback form, you will receive resources that will complement this evening's discussion, and also a way for us to share with you about future events from The Edge and City Bible Forum. Our goal is to keep the conversation going. We want to hear from you and encourage more discussions on many of the topics brought up tonight. Thank you again for being part of The Edge. I'm Russ Matthews from City Bible Forum. We hope you enjoyed tonight's event, and we look forward to seeing you in the future as we take the next topic to the edge.
We